People of Earth, we have come to upgrade your cosmic consciousness. DNA activation ready. In 3, 2, 1.
Hi, welcome to Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. I'm Craig Anderson.
And I'm Lou Quinto.
On today's episode of Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership, Lou and I are going to give an update on the state of remote work. Lou, you and I talked about a study that was recently done by Upwork on the future of the workforce and really employer attitudes as we've kind of gone through this kind of accelerated embrace of remote work.
It was
and
a pretty
really
significant study, too.
Oh, yeah, it was. 1,500 hiring managers, I think, most of them in the C-suite.
Yeah.
And they did kind of a two time frame, one before COVID, which was just part of their normal reporting, and then post. So they really kind of came at some interesting conclusions of hiring managers as we look at things right now. And they looked at three areas that were of key interest. One was the rise of remote work, how it's kind of accelerated since November. The second was the overall remote work experiment. How's it going? What are we seeing? And then third, the future of remote work. So Lou, why don't you kick us off with the first topic, the rise of remote work?
The rise of remote work, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, that it went originally pre-COVID was 35%, and it jumped up in just a matter of weeks up to 65%. And so everybody had to turn on a dime. And I think we mentioned that, I've mentioned this before, but Eric Schneider, the former CEO of Google, had mentioned that, in the last just 2 months from March 15th all the way until May 15th, we've probably seen a decade of technological and business advancement because we've had to do it. The rise of the remote workforce, it was companies thought about remote workforce before. The generational differences where the millennials and now the Gen Zers, remote work is appealing to them. Also was appealing to many companies because you could then hire people that were in different locations from your office and still have them as part of your team without having to bring them into the office, pay for them to relocate and to move. In the short period of time that we've been in shelter and in the remote workforce, and it's increased, initially, the reaction of everyone was, I don't know if I like this, but then everybody's getting used to it. The study shows that, almost 75% of the people have said that when we come off of the COVID restrictions, that they either want to stay at working from home, or they would like to do part-time home and part-time back at the office. So I don't think remote work is going away.
No, and I think it's an interesting thought process. I think a lot of the kind of older line hiring managers who were, I'm not really comfortable with work from home. I really like to see things getting done. I like to watch what's going on. I think there's value in having the interaction at the workplace. By this accelerated timeline that we had where suddenly, boom, everybody, half your workforce is working from home.
Right.
Now, that I wonder as we start to study this, as we continue to move forward, how much those attitudes have shifted. Will we see more, you said kind of the younger generations, the millennials and the Zoomers or whatever they are, everyone behind that coming up, they've always kind of been pushing, let's work from home. And you've always had this resistance. Now I'm wondering how much of that resistance is actually crumbling. And are we going to see managers and senior executives kind of say, oh, you know what? Now that I've seen it, maybe I can live with it. So I do think we're going to start to see this stay more. As the executives start to look at things.
Yeah, and I think the proof is going to be in the pudding. As with anything, you can sit and talk about a particular work model and envision how it might work. And let's face it, our brain likes to think in the negative. And when we don't know about something in reality, we start to create nightmares around things. But I think now that we've been in this situation, though, even those hardline managers, Craig, as you call them, cannot deny that productivity has either maintained the same or in some instances it's increased. A lot of bad office habits like meetings starting late, meetings not ending on time or going way over time has really cleaned things up a little bit, if I can use that term. And you're going to find that some people, even, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, in this particular instance, those, hardliners, as you referred to them, it's been demonstrated to them. The visible evidence is there. It's hard to deny that it won't work. So I truly believe that it's here to stay.
No, that's great. I think, and that tees up actually the second topic about the overall experiment, right? You know,
Right.
56% of hiring managers said it's going better than expected, and 35% it's gone as expected. Now, I'm not really sure, and it's not clear in the study. Does that mean they expected it would be terrible, or they expected it would be awful? But you know, but it seems like overall remote managers are, or the hiring managers are now viewing remote work pretty positively. They think things like, you know, no commute times going well. Like half of them thought that. You know, a
Right.
third of them saw increased productivity. And I think even you and I, in some of our earlier episodes on this, weren't really sure where the productivity thing is going to go.
I was a little skeptical that productivity maintained the same or increased, but again,
It's
proof was in the pudding. It has.
yeah, I've seen it both in studies and anecdotally. And it's funny, kind of another stat that came out of the another data point that came out is just under 2% said nothing worked well. So every hiring manager saw something worked well. Interestingly, and I think we brought this up when we thought about this before, is the things that aren't going too well, though, is about a third reported technology issues. And I think that depends, you know, it's probably one thing depending on, you know, where your company is located and where your workforce is located and how much you had to spend real quick to get the technology out, you know, if people didn't have cameras and some of those things.
Right.
The increased distractions at home was also a challenge. You know, how much of that is remote work and how much of that is all the COVID related impacts of kids trying to go to school from home while mom and dad were trying to work from home.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and I think these are the ones that are of interest to me, how we manage these long term is, you know, a third said reduce team cohesion, a third said reduce, you know, difficulties in communication, and about a quarter talked about teams being less organized. So, you know, I think we touched on some of the positive things, but how are we going to deal with, you know, how should leaders be thinking about pulling their teams together when their teams are distributed?
Yeah, well, for those people who said that, you know, they felt that things were disorganized, at the very beginning, everything was disorganized.
Yeah.
And let's face it, we all don't learn at the same pace. So we were all on different learning curves. And so the organization was trying to keep up with the learning curves of different individuals. There are probably just some people who don't feel comfortable with the remote work situation. They like to be in the office. They like to, you know, be in their cubicle. They like to be in back of their office computer. And now they were using their home computer, if not provided a computer by the company. You know, you talked about when it comes to the negatives, there's negatives to everything. We've been thrust into a new business model that has proved that it can be efficient and it can work. And
Right.
so in that particular instance, I don't know as far as negatives. I'm sure you sit down with 30 different people, you'll come up with 30 different negatives of what happened. I don't think we're enough far removed from the situation to look back and be able to say, do a good analysis of what happened. So we need some time to go back and really look at how things settle down.
No, I think you're right. And I think, you know, some of these issues that were kind of reported on the negative side around team cohesion and organization, some of that's just really working through how do I kind of recreate that experience of people being in the office and kind of that collegiality in a remote setting. So, you know, I've seen some things about work happy hours that were being done. I actually talked to somebody when they've suggested a work happy hour and they found out that someone told them, well, 30% of our workforce is under 21. So we really can't do a happy hour. But, you know, can you do some of those things? And there was an interesting thing I mentioned to you, I saw this morning about leaders kind of opening up a room, like having people outside their office door when they just want to knock. It's just kind of carve out times where they can create the waiting room and, you know, let people in one at a time to kind of touch
On
base
Zoom, right?
on Zoom. Yeah. Or
Yeah,
maybe it
yeah,
works on Teams too. I don't
yeah,
know, but
yeah.
just different ways you can kind of recreate that experience. And just like you might have intentionally held town halls or intentionally held an ice cream social, you may try and figure out some other things. I think it was Facebook said, you know, while they're going to let a lot of their people work from home, some of those savings would be mitigated because they're going to probably still have times when they bring everybody in, just to kind of build some of those together. So it's an interesting thing that's coming.
Yeah, well, let's face it. We've gone through personal situations like that too. We've celebrated Passover, Easter. We're celebrating graduations, birthdays, births of children, and we've adapted them very naturally oh, well, let's use Zoom, or let's use Facebook, or let's use, FaceTime or something like that. And so I if anything, and I keep saying, we have proved that the workforce has been very, very resilient during these times. To be able to make changes, and I'm not using this expression lightly, overnight, we have had to make these changes. I truly believe that, again, there's negative to everything, but I don't know if we can say the negatives outweigh the positives that we've experienced in this time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and as we start looking to the future, the managers seem pretty, there's been kind of a huge mindset shift for the managers. They're showing that somewhere around, as a result of COVID, their organizations are going to be about 60% either somewhat or significantly more remote than before. There was they were projecting about a 30% growth rate before COVID in remote work from home. Now they're projecting that to be 65%, which is a huge shift.
Sure.
That can be looked at in a lot of ways, just on impacts to a lot of different entities. But, just for employers themselves, what does this mean as they look to the future when they're starting to plan for capacity for new employees as we get back into more of a growth phase? And further, what does this mean for productivity? Will we see this increased productivity? And since people are kind of, are we getting to the point where, hey, I can let my people be flexible, I can trust my people, but on the other hand, I'm going to say, well, wow, I can get a lot more out of them now. So
Right.
I maybe don't need to bring in as many people as I thought.
Right. Well, I think one of the things you're going to find, and it coincides perfectly with the generational differences, what millennials and what the Generation Z coming into the workforce is looking for. They're looking for those flexible work times, and they're looking for that. I'll call it 4-day work week, where they have a good work-life balance that they'll be able to deal with. A lot of these changes, even though they happened in a crisis situation, time goes on, we're going to see that shift that dealt with the generational differences, where you had the boomers and you had the veterans and the Gen Xers who like the 8 to 5, 1 hour for lunch, and they love those policies and procedures, and they resist it. Well, let's face it, everybody, if they had a negative comment to make about a millennial, they always said they're lazy, they don't like to work, they don't like to do all those negative stereotypes they threw out. Now there's going to be a significant switch, and the millennial wants and needs, as well as the Gen Z coming in, because let's face it, Gen Z and millennial already account for 50% of the workplace. So this was like the tipping point of how do we go from the old business model? How do we make that swing? This situation gave us that opportunity to be able to make that transition. Very disruptive, but at the same time, forced every business into making the changes that needed to be made in order to meet the needs of the next generation of leaders coming in.
I'm a little skeptical about the 4-day work week thing. I just, I'm old enough to remember.
You already do a 4-day work week. So what are you complaining about?
I just remember when computers were going to save our lives and we were only going to have to work 3 days a week because of all the increased productivity we'd have. Except what the trick is all the employers decide, well, let's just get more out of people since we can get more of it automated. So I think it remains to be seen what this means. I think every organization is going to love to see more productivity. Right. Maybe what we'll see, an ideal outcome could be we expect more productivity, but we also put in more flexibility and start getting around some of the things you and I have talked about of, don't manage by how many hours you work, manage by how much you accomplish. Right. And so, the more efficient we can all be, I think we can actually turn this work from home experiment into something pretty grand and really see a sea change over time. So,
yeah. And we talked about that in previous episodes too. When we talked about managing remote workers, we talked about all of those different issues. Let's jump into key takeaways. And, one of my key takeaways is that we're too close to the situation right now to be able to truly predict what the future is going to look like coming in. We've got some good learnings. And in fact, one of the things I've been telling a lot of people I've been talking with is, always start by asking yourself, what have we learned? And keep asking that question, what have we learned? Keep it fresh in your mind. So, and I'll use an example. If you don't do these learnings now, you're going to forget them. It's like a witness that witnesses a crime. When the police officer interviews them at the time, right after the crime happened, they've got a very good total recall. But when it gets to court, 7 to 8 months later, of a sudden they're like, well, I think the street light was on, but I'm not sure. And I think he was wearing a blue shirt, but it could have been a green shirt. Having these conversations now of what have we learned, continual, what have we learned, will keep everything in perspective and not change historical data and information from what you've got. That's my biggest key takeaway out of all this.
No, those are great points. When I think about this is, it's something that always worked well for me when I was leading teams is, as we're kind of going through this evolution, a great thing for leaders to do when we talk about things like how do we kind of keep collegiality in things and, how do we look at productivity is ask your people, talk to your people, get their experience, set up the time to have those conversations intentionally to say, hey, I'm struggling with how to make things like they were, at least as far as us feeling like we're all part of the same team. What would help you with that? Because it's always a mistake when we decide to prescriptively push things down as managers without really getting, especially when you're going through this much change, really getting a good pulse on what's going on from our employees. So that'd be my takeaway. So why don't you bring us home, Lou?
Okay. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership, discussion about the state of the remote workforce as it is today. If you like this video, please go ahead and click the like button. Subscribe to our Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership channel on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on Facebook. And in addition to that, don't forget that you can also download Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership on your favorite podcast platform. So we hope you would go ahead and do that as well. So as I tell everybody, keep your hands washed, keep your distance. I'm Lou Quinto.
And I'm Craig Anderson.